Metanomics is brought to you by Remedy Communications and Doosan Writers Metaverse.
So for starters, you co-headed Obama's FCC transition team. What does that involve?
Having no life, basically.
All in service to your country.
Absolutely in service to the country. The transition team is the group that operates between the presidential election in November and the inauguration in January. And basically, it's the small group of people responsible for identifying issues, reviewing what's happening in the agencies, and advising the people that are selecting the senior members of the administration, the cabinet secretaries, and the other leadership, and so forth. So Susan and I, and we had a third person, Dale Hatfield, on our team, were responsible for looking at the FCC and trying to understand what was going on there and to be able to provide options and information for both the people selecting the new FCC commissioners and then for those people and their team to understand how to develop their agenda and what sorts of things they would need to do in office.
Yeah. Now, Kevin Martin headed up the FCC before, and I understand he came into a fair bit of criticism. Could you just sort of characterize what the issues were and how that affected, the search for someone new?
So Kevin Martin was the chairman of the FCC in the latter half of the Bush administration. There was a great deal of criticism that his leadership of the FCC wasn't transparent, and that it was biased, and so forth. There was several reports that came out of the Government Accountability Office, the GAO, as well as an investigative report from the House of Representatives. There were definitely concerns that were raised about the way he ran the agency. But the FCC chairman is something that's designated by the president. So we knew that President Obama coming in would have an opportunity to name his own FCC chairman, and our job was not really to look back and criticize. It was to get a deep understanding of what the issues were and help the new team coming in to really bring the FCC back to the level of excellence that it should be able to achieve.
Mm-hmm. And now part of that attempt, I guess, resulted in getting Julius Genachowski as the person who's now been nominated to take on the chairmanship. How would you characterize his positions on internet policy?
Well, Julius is a very distinguished both public servant, entrepreneur, as well as a business executive. He was at the FCC along with me in the mid-1990s during the Clinton administration, and before that he was a Supreme Court clerk and a very distinguished career even before then. Julius then went on to become an executive at IAC, which is Barry Diller's internet e-commerce company, and subsequently a venture capitalist. So he's deeply familiar with technology and innovation and business, as well as the kinds of communications issues that the FCC oversees. I think that I was at his confirmation hearing last week. His confirmation has been held up by the Senate for the past few months. They finally scheduled the hearing, and one of the members of the committee said, "Well, if this guy isn't qualified to be the FCC chairman, I don't know who would be." He's not yet in a position to be articulating specific policies, but I think if you look to what President Obama said about technology and communications during the campaign, it should give some indications of directions the FCC is likely to go, because Julius was one of the key people on the Technology Advisory Committee that I also served on during the campaign for President Obama.
Yeah, and what I'd like to do, really in exploring the directions that policy is likely to go, is actually take a somewhat more legal view. You're a law professor, and you've written a number of interesting articles that are all like hot off the presses. I think they're all still forthcoming or have just been put into print. And so I want to walk through those in a minute, but before we get there, I have another question, which is, you are probably one of the very few members, working with the Obama administration who are active World of Warcraft players. And so I'm wondering how that experience has affected your outlook on internet policy.
Well, I'll say that I think I'm one of the few people active with the Obama administration who is publicly an active World of Warcraft player.
Okay, fair enough.
It's hard to know. And that's something that someone found on my blog, I think, during the transition period, and it was no great secret, but people were interested in that. Warcraft is something I do for fun. I've played fairly actively off and on for 3 or 4 years, and I've found it both tremendously enjoyable as an entertainment experience, but also tremendously enlightening about the potential of virtual worlds and online communities, and just an extraordinary challenge and a really rewarding social experience. I've gotten a lot out of Warcraft, both personally and professionally. But I do it for fun because it's a game. I don't do it as a policy activity. But I think seeing what the experience is like of interacting with a community, with a guild and people beyond that in a virtual world, I think is instructive. It's really hard to explain to someone what that's like if they don't do it. Same as it's hard to explain Second Life to someone if they don't do it. And of course, there are significant differences between an MMOG like Warcraft and a user-created world like Second Life, but the notion of interacting through an avatar and the notion of using multiple streams of information, voice and text chat and video and so forth, is an experience that I think is going to be increasingly central to the way people do business and the way people interact over the coming decades. So having that familiarity, I found was helpful to me in thinking about where the internet is going and where society is going, frankly, which is important to understand if you're helping advise on technology policy.
We've seen not just the Obama administration, but a lot of mainstream media and politicians embrace some social media. Twitter, of course, is all the rage over the last couple of weeks. Facebook also. YouTube has been sort of integrated seamlessly into a lot of TV news now. Do you see virtual worlds also making that step, or do we have a lot longer to wait?
That's a good question. I mean, the Second Life, of course, was very hot about 2 or 3 years ago. I mean, it was in terms of the publicity level almost similar to what Twitter has been over the past several months, although it never quite got to that usage level. I mean, Twitter is still, I like to tell people, it's still roughly 1% of internet users worldwide are on Twitter, so it's not totally pervasive, but it's 30 or 40 million people, which is more substantial than any virtual world today. But I think it depends how you define a virtual world. I was at the State of Play conference last weekend in New York, which is the main academic and research conference on virtual worlds, and Ralph Koster, the CEO of MetaPlaces, was there as one of the keynotes, and he was talking about thinking about Twitter as a virtual world, for example, and the idea that we assume that immersion and the kind of visual experience that for example, we have in Second Life is at the core of a virtual world, but it doesn't necessarily have to be, and that we're seeing some of the same kinds of interactions that were first developed in virtual worlds coming out through social media